25.12 is filled with champion changes as there are 27 different champions being adjusted. Included in these changes is a mini rework to Rammus that will completely shift the identity of the champion. Jax, Garen, and Lee Sin are all receiving buffs, while Azir and Kalista are being nerfed yet again due to pro play. So as always, we'll have the complete breakdown of every single change and an update to the solo queue tier list for every single role. And let's be honest, picking the best champions is fun, but is that really enough on its own? I don't know about you, but locking in Set just because he's OP tier doesn't really help if you're lacking knowledge on how to lane properly. However, you can stomp lane phase with Set when using our brand new courses that go hard in teaching you everything you need to know, which will have you speed running any game below Diamond, all from a rank 1 challenger who has used these tips to dominate not 1, but 5 regions in solo queue. And that's just for top lane. Your mid lane OP tier Diana pick becomes actually unstoppable when you know all the essentials of mid lane thanks to the new mid lane series over on our platform that our top 10 challenger player Strumpus has tirelessly worked on exclusive to our members. Our tier list gets you the right champions, SkillCapped gets you the right skills, and we're so confident it works. If you don't climb 5 divisions while actively using the platform, you literally don't pay a single cent. So why hold yourself back this season and finally get the rank you deserve? And with that being said, let's get into it. With the mass amount of champion changes in 25.12, Riot has gone light on the system changes as there's just 2, and first up is Otacon. Otacon is going to be spawning much more often up in the top lane for 25.12 as the top lane damage importance is being increased by 20 to 25%. Grasp has been a pretty popular rune on ranged champions, especially in the higher tiers of play, so Riot is going to be nerfing the ranged champion effectiveness of the rune from 60 to 40%. For solo queue specifically, the ranged champions running Grasp the most have been Gnar, Jace, and Senna support, so they likely swap over to an alternative option for 25.12. We do see Grasp a bit on champs like Victor, Teemo, and Smolder, but they have very low play rates with the rune in solo queue, so they won't be affected at all by the nerf. This is definitely more of a pro-skewed change that shouldn't influence solo queue at all that much outside of a select few. So moving on to the top lane now, we have a few Aatrox buffs that will increase his sustain as passive champion healing is going up from 80% of damage dealt to 100% of damage dealt. E-champion Omnivamp is up as well from 0.9% bonus health to 1.1% bonus health. The 25.11 Aatrox changes ended up dropping his win rate by 1%, so these buffs should bring him back up and we'll be moving Aatrox from A into S tier. Garen ended up losing a bit too much power from his 25.11 changes, so Riot will be adding some damage onto his E for 25.12. The base damage is down while the AD ratio is going up, so we can look at the comparison clips to see exactly what this means. At level 9 with Stridebreaker completed, a fully channeled E will be providing Garen with 17 extra damage. So definitely nothing overly impactful, and we don't see Garen moving up the tier list as a result, so he's going to remain in the A tier. Jax has been one of the weaker fighter top lane champs for quite some time, so he's finally getting buffed for this patch with his passive attack speed per stack going up from 3.5 scaling to 11% to 5 scaling to 12.5%. As we can see here, at max stacks at level 1, this equates to having 0.96 attacks per second in 25.12 as opposed to 0.88 attacks per second from 25.11. This buff is likely enough to push Jax back into a good spot for solo queue, so he's going to be removed from B tier jail and moved into A. We have a buff to Mordekaiser's Q on the way, with the base damage being increased from 80 scaling to 200 to 80 scaling to 220. We don't think this buff will be quite enough to move Mord back into the top lane S tier, so he's going to remain in A for now. Gwen has been more problematic in higher tiers of play lately, so she's getting nerfed with her base health dropping from 620 to 600. W is nerfed as well, with the cooldown going up from 22 scaling to 18 seconds to 24 scaling to 18 seconds. So nothing too major here, and we won't be moving Gwen anywhere on the tier list as she'll remain placed in the B tier. We've got another pro play skewed nerf here as Rumble will be losing percent health damage on his Q, dropping from 6 scaling to 10% to 6 scaling to 8%. E slow is going down from 15 to 10%. So we've had Rumble placed in the top lane C tier for a while now for solo queue specifically, so these nerfs just solidify that position even further. It looks like Rumble is turning into one of those champs where Riot won't be able to balance him for both pro and solo queue, because despite his win rate being at 47% for the average player, his priority in pro has remained high. Shen has been an OP tier top laner for the past few patches now, so Riot's hitting him with a nerf for 25.12 as his E bonus health ratio is being lowered from 15% to 11%. This nerf really shouldn't negatively influence Shen all that much, as the very furthest we see him dropping down the tier list is into S. We'll be dropping him there for now, but there's really no reason to stop playing Shen for 25.12 if you've been having success on him. Yorick is going to be losing some damage on his Q at max rank, with it dropping from 30 scaling to 130 to 30 scaling to 110. Mistwalker's attack speed is being changed as well, from scaling off Yorick's bonus attack speed to now attacking at 8 scaling to 80% based on level. Yorick has been right on the line between A and S tier in previous patches, so these nerfs will solidify his spot in the A tier. So if we have a look at the top lane tier list, OP tier is now going to be locked down by just 2 champions being Set and Kayle. Shen will remain a great pickup, but just drops down 1 tier and into S due to his nerf. Gnar will be one to watch for this patch because of the Grasp nerf. However, we don't think he should lose that much power because Fleet is a completely viable alternative to Grasp for him. Fleet has had a near identical win rate to Grasp on Gnar, so if the Grasp nerf does hurt, then he just moves over to Fleet and won't actually lose any relative power. Same thing goes for Jace. He has been liking Grasp the most lately, but still performs very well with Phase Rush, so if anything, we just see more of a shift towards Phase Rush due to the Grasp nerf. And then Jax should definitely be worth considering for 25.12 with his passive buff, as the champ has been one of the weaker fighters all season long, but this buff should push him back into an A tier spot. These Rammus adjustments are absolutely insane, as it's looking like the champ will no longer be that pick you play into heavy AD comps. This is because Rammus's passive is now going to grant you bonus AD equal to 15% bonus armor and 15% bonus magic resist. Previously, his passive dealt damage that scaled off of armor only, so now that his passive scales off magic resist, that's pretty big. Q base damage will be going up from 80 scaling to 200 to 80 scaling to 240. W is now going to work so that when enemies attack you, they will be dealt 15 base damage plus 10% of Rammus's total armor and magic resist. Previously, his W dealt damage equal to his passive's bonus damage, so yet again, we see a change that incentivizes building magic resist. Big one here is to the bonus magic resist you get from activating W, as it's going up from 10 to 27. Bonus armor from W is down though from 40 to 27, so Rammus is going to be much more skewed to performing against magic damage now as opposed to physical damage. W bonus armor ratio is going down as well from 35 scaling to 75% to 30 scaling to 60%, while W bonus magic resist ratio is up from 30 scaling to 50% to 30 scaling to 60%. W duration is up from 6 to 7 seconds, however, basic attacks will no longer extend the duration of Rammus W by 0.4 seconds. For some E changes, it will have a new effect to where you deal 80 scaling to 160 magic damage to monsters. E will no longer provide 20 scaling to 40% attack speed though. And then for the R changes, you will no longer cause 3 shockwaves to burst from the area after landing to deal damage and slow the enemies. R will no longer deal 50% bonus damage in the center. Base damage is up though from 100 scaling to 250 to 150 scaling to 350. R slow is being increased from 15 scaling to 20% to 30 scaling to 50%. Cooldown is up quite a bit from 90 at all ranks to 120 scaling to 90 seconds. For a couple of base stat changes, base attack damage is up from 55 to 65. Base armor is going down from 40 to 35. Armor growth is dropping from 5.5 to 4.5, and base attack speed is up from 0.656 to 0.7. So all things considered, it's the passive and W changes that really stand out. The fact both now scale off magic resist is huge for Rammus's viability into magic damage comps. With that said, it's looking like he will be generally weaker when up against physical damage. So does this mean Rammus now becomes an AP counter as opposed to an AD counter? We'll have to see once the changes hit live servers, as it's impossible to tell exactly how powerful he's going to land. So for now, we're not going to make any adjustment on the tier list for Rammus, and we'll circle back during the mid-patch update with a more concrete idea as to where he's landed power-wise. Riot has had a more difficult time balancing Vi for both pro play and solo queue recently, so they are back again in 25.12 with more adjustments. W max health damage is going down from 4 scaling to 10% to 4 scaling to 8%. W bonus AD ratio is up though from 2.85 to 3.5%. W attack speed is dropping from 30 scaling to 60% to 30 scaling to 50%. E base damage is going up from 0 scaling to 60 to 10 scaling to 90, while E total AD ratio drops from 120 to 110%. So whether these adjustments land as net buffs or nerfs is hard to say. Whichever way they do sway, we don't see it being too significant, so for now, we won't be moving Vi up the tier list as she'll remain in C. A really nice buff is on the way for Bel'Veth, as her R cast range is being increased from 275 up to 450 units. So the chase potential after landing a kill becomes stronger due to this buff, and the overall skirmish strength of Bel'Veth will be better. Will it actually be enough to influence her power in solo queue though is the ultimate question. For high elo, we can see her being an S tier champ, but for the majority of ranks, we still think she likely lands in A tier. So for now, we'll be leaving Bel'Veth in A, but there is a chance she gets bumped up for mid-patch depending on how impactful this buff actually lands. We have a pretty nice buff to Lee Sin for 25.12 with his E cooldown being lowered by 1 second, but the bigger one is his E slow going up from 20 scaling to 80% to 35 scaling to 75%. So early on in the game now, using ward hop to get in range of the enemy and then slowing them with E will make it even more guaranteed to line up your Q immediately after. A 15% increase in slow at rank 1 will make Lee's early ganks more potent. Not only due to the fact that he will be able to land his Q easier, but because it will give his teammates more time to close the gap and hit the target. So in a way, you can think of a buff like this actually adding DPS to a gank. Does Lee suddenly climb to the top of the meta because of these buffs? Most likely not, but he will be in a good A tier spot for 25.12. Nidalee is going to receive a buff to her Cougar form's E-AP ratio for this patch, as it's going up from 40 to 55%. So considering Nidalee is a more early game reliant jungler, she would much rather have a base stat buff than an AP ratio buff. This buff isn't going to enhance the early game snowball power of Nidalee, so we don't see it increasing her standing in meta at all, and she's just going to remain in the jungle B tier. So moving on to the complete jungle tier list, we don't actually have any movement for 25.12 despite all the junglers being changed. Most of the buffs and nerfs are pretty neutral, and the Rammus changes are the only ones that we could see really shifting a champion's power in a significant way. But like we mentioned when covering the Rammus changes, it's impossible for anyone to actually know where he's going to land power-wise going into the patch, so we won't be adjusting his tier list placement for now until we get to see the changes on live servers. So this means the top tier picks from last patch will reign supreme for another one, with Jarvan, Volibear, and Nocturne making up the OP tier. A jungler who has seen a spike in play rate and win rate over the past few patches, but is still in quite an underrated spot, is Trundle. Trundle jungle is currently a really good pick into most AD fighter junglers, while he's less effective when playing into spell-based magic damage threats. Champs like Viego, Kayn, Lee, and Xin Zhao are who he's finding the most success against in solo queue right now, and all four of those junglers are played at pretty high rates. So if you're looking for a shake-up to your champion pool, then pulling out Trundle in select spots is definitely worth considering for 25.12. We have a couple of mid laners getting buffed for 25.12, and first up is Aurora. Base magic resist is being increased from 30 to 32, while our AP ratio sees a boost going from 60 to 70%. There's a chance these buffs are enough to push Aurora up into A tier, but we realistically don't see that being the case, so for now, she's going to remain in B. LeBlanc will be receiving a small buff to her E2 AP ratio, going from 80 to 85%. Our cooldown is being reduced as well by 5 seconds at all ranks. Definitely pretty light buffs to LeBlanc, which we don't think will be enough to move her up the tier list, so she will continue to be placed in the B tier. These TF buffs are actually looking pretty interesting, as his R cooldown is dropping by a whole 20 seconds at all ranks. E bonus attack speed is going up by 5% at all ranks. So it's the R buff that's the big one, and for a semi-global spell that can heavily impact the game, cooldown being lowered should be somewhat significant. TF was already buffed last patch, and if you guys watched our OP builds video from 25.11, then you'd know that Unsealed Spellbook is also providing Twisted Fate with a lot more power after its recent buff. If more players swap over to Spellbook for 25.12, and with this buff coming through, there's a world where TF is an S tier mid laner. Spellbook Twisted Fate players have literally been winning at a 53% clip in 25.11, while Electrocute users are under 50%, so it's a big gap there. So we are going to go ahead and move Twisted Fate into the mid lane S tier, because if everything aligns the way we think it should, he will be a top tier pick. Riot has a few nerfs lined up for Ahri in 25.12, as her E charm duration is being lowered by 0.2 seconds at max rank, while R cooldown is going up by 10 seconds at rank 1, 5 seconds at rank 2, but will stay the same at max rank. The E change doesn't really matter that much, especially if you're someone who maxes E last on Ahri, because you wouldn't even feel the effects of that nerf until you hit level 14. As for the R change, losing 10 seconds at rank 1 isn't insignificant, but it's not going to make Ahri a terrible pick either. Ahri has just barely been holding on to an S tier spot in recent patches, so with these nerfs coming through, we'll be dropping her into A. Despite holding one of the lowest win rates for any mid laner in solo queue, Azir is being nerfed once again due to his pro play dominance. Movement speed will be dropping from 335 to 330, and bonus attack speed per level takes a hit, going from 6 to 5.5%. So all these nerfs accomplish is make an already weak solo queue champ even weaker, so Azir is going to be dropping into the mid lane C tier for 25.12. Talia has been one of the more underrated yet strong mid lane champs all season long, so Riot's hitting her with a few nerfs in 25.12. Base magic resist will be dropping from 30 to 28, while empowered Q damage amp is going down from 190 to 180%. So even with these nerfs, we can't see them being quite enough to warrant a move out of the S tier for Talia, so that's where she will remain for this patch. For the mid lane tier list in 25.12, Diana is going to be the lone OP tier pick once again. Diana is by far the best assassin mid right now, as the recent AP item changes have been great for her and pushed an already strong champ into that OP level. Twisted Fate is definitely the mid laner to watch for this patch, as his new spellbook setup and buff to R should put him in contention for being one of the best solo queue mids. There's even a new build for Twisted Fate that has started popping up in the higher elos recently, and it consists of a Rocket Belt rush. You go Rocket Belt into Lichbane and Fire Cannon, and the long range catch power you have with this setup is absolutely nuts. Rod of Ages rush is pretty overrated on Twisted Fate right now after it got nerfed, so Rocket Belt rush is something we'd recommend you try for this patch. Aphelios hasn't been in a terrible spot lately, but he hasn't been great either, so Riot has a few buffs lined up for 25.12. Base attack speed is going up from 0.64 to 0.665. Calibrum base damage is being increased by 10 damage at rank 1, and the Severum bonus movement speed is going up from 20 to 25%. So will these buffs provide enough juice for Aphelios to move into the ADC A tier? We're going to say no right now, but are happy to be proven wrong. So if they do add a bit more power than expected, we will give him the bump for the mid-patch tier list. Samira is getting buffed for a second patch in a row, and this time it's her passive movement speed going up from 2 scaling to 3.5% to 2.75 scaling to 3.5%. Q base damage is buffed as well, going from 0 scaling to 20 to 5 scaling to 25. Samira had been just barely holding on to an A tier spot last patch, so with these buffs coming through, we don't think that they will be enough to move her into S, but she will be a very good A tier pickup for 25.12. Zeri receiving buffs is definitely one of the more surprising changes of the patch, as she has already been a good A tier pick in recent patches. It's Zeri's R that will be buffed with the base damage going up, and then the chain lightning AD ratio is being increased as well. So there's a legitimate chance Zeri moves into the ADC S tier for 25.12. We're gonna go ahead and give her that push up, but if the buffs don't land quite as impactful as we think, then she may need to push back down to A for the mid-patch tier list. Callista is on the chopping block yet again, as she's being nerfed in two different ways, with her base health going down from 580 to 560, and Q cooldown is being increased from 8 to 9 seconds. So if there's ever been a clear-cut weakest ADC for solo queue, then we're seeing that right now with Callista, as she's been a victim of constant nerfs due to her pro play presence that translate into her being an absolutely terrible solo queue champ. I think it's about time for some sort of mini rework, because it's clear this champ will never be good for solo queue as long as pro play exists. Should go without saying, but you'll find Callista in the ADC C tier for this patch. I'm pretty sure we all saw this one coming, as it's the Riot special where they buff Senna's soul drop rate on kills, and then the very next patch they have to nerf it because it makes her too OP as an ADC. So soul drop rate on kill will be going back down from 15 to 10%. It's still up from the 8.4% level that it used to be in 25.9, but with it now only being 1.6% higher than before, it's likely going to reduce Senna's power in the role by a substantial margin. So for now, we will be moving Senna out of the OP tier and into S. However, there is definitely a chance she drops as far as A tier. The one thing that we can be certain about is Senna will no longer be a top 5 ADC for solo queue, but exactly where she lands power-wise is tough to pinpoint till we see the change on live servers. Varus will be nerfed for 25.12, and this is another change being issued because of pro. Armor will be dropping from 27 to 24. Varus has already been a pretty mediocre B tier pick for solo queue as of late, and we don't see that changing for 25.12. So here's how we've got the ADC tier list aligned for this patch, as the OP tier is now going to consist of Jinx, Trist, and Sivir. Sivir bumps up into OP due to Senna being nerfed, as we mentioned last patch. With any sort of indirect change that shifts one of the OP champs down the tier list, Sivir is next in line to move up, and she'll be a top 3 ADC for this patch. Sivir is such a great ADC to pick up if you are new to the role or just want an easier ADC to play. Her kit is very noob friendly, but the carry power she has is incredible as well, so just because she's not as mechanically demanding as other ADCs doesn't mean she's not impactful. Speaking of mechanically demanding, Zeri is an ADC who will take you a bit more time to get used to, but she should be worth the pickup in 25.12 due to her buff, and we've got her moving up into the S tier. Even though Neeko was designed to be a mid laner, she's primarily played as a support these days, so let's have a look at the nerfs Riot has lined up. Q initial damage is going down by 20 at rank 1, while the AP ratio on Q is up from 50 to 60%. W on hit damage will be nerfed as well, dropping by 10 at all ranks. So a pretty big hit to the early game bully strength of Neeko's support. 20 damage removed from a spell that you can spam out off cooldown in lane and hit pretty consistently will add up over the course of the lane. So we don't think Neeko's support will be worth playing over the majority of supports in 25.12, as she's being moved into the support B tier. Riot's decided to throw Bard a bone for this patch, as his base movement speed is going up from 330 to 335. It is a pretty small buff, but since Bard is a roaming support, movement speed is more impactful on him than many other champs, so the buff likely lands a bit more powerful for him than it would for most others. We don't see it being quite enough to warrant a push into the S tier though, so Bard is going to remain placed in A. So the Neeko and Bard changes are all we've got for support in 25.12. Despite there being 27 champion changes, support has only 2, so as you could expect looking at the tier list, we don't have any big movements for this patch. Braum and Nami continue to lock down the OP tier spots for support. Senna support players are really hating life right now, because not only has ADC Senna been in a stronger spot, but support gets even weaker for this patch due to the Grasp nerf. Grasp has been Senna support's best keystone rune in recent patches, so now that it's nerfed, she loses even more strength. Senna support is definitely a pick you want to stay away from right now, and we're going to be adjusting her into the C tier for 25.12. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't won't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top-tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it, everyone. That's a complete look at the solo queue tier list for every single role as we head into 25.12. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you back soon.